Hi, it's Tom with Heritage Electrical. Thanks for watching this video. Today we'd like to talk about what's involved in the installation of a supply for an outside shed, summer house, office, hot tub, outdoor patio heating, or maybe some outdoor lighting. So the idea of this video is just to show you what's involved in the preparation for laying a cable, the type of cable that you might need to install, the size of the cable, labour costs involved with getting the cable in, and this is before, you know, the outlay for the office itself or the shed or whatever you might be installing. So this first example is an outdoor lighting installation which we're completing for a customer. Now you can see from the use of a digger that this is going to be quite a large outdoor lighting installation. Now the first thing to note from our regulations that we're following is that the cable or the duct that we're using to bury the cable needs to be buried to a depth of at least ½ metre. Now this is obviously because cables that are buried to a depth of less than ½ metre are more likely to be inadvertently damaged by, you know, gardening, moving earth, etc. So it needs to be at least ½ metre down. And in areas of horticulture, so, you know, gardening, etc., the minimum depth is recommended to be 0.6 metres. Now you can see we're using a digger here because unfortunately it's not just plain old soil, it's mixed in with rocks, gravel. The soil itself is very heavy clay, and so it's hard work. So in the course of preparing the trenches to lay the cable, it's turned out to be more cost effective to hire a digger for a couple of days in this instance. Now obviously the digger can't get all the way to the top of the garden, so there's man hours as well involved in excavating. You can see it's a really long run all the way back to the incoming supply in the property. Now you can see from the weather in this video that this work was carried out at the beginning of the year when it was very wet, so we haven't been back yet to complete that installation. We're just waiting for the groundworks guys to go in and sort the drainage out and for the weather to just clear up a bit before we go and finish that off. Now in this next video the customer is looking to install a summer house. They also might be looking to install a hot tub, some patio heaters. They're looking to acquire the piece of land behind the house. So there's potentially quite a lot of current using equipment going into the back garden and the land behind that. In this first clip you can see Paul is coring a hole. Now this is the back of the house and we're looking to fish a cable through to the front of the house through the floor void. So it needs to go basically through this outside wall, underneath the kitchen, and then through to the garage at the front of the house where the consumer unit is located. So this is a 4-inch core hole, just so that you can see we can get an arm in to help the cable through. So this keeps all of the cable out of sight. You go to some people's installations where you can see a black cable clipped up the wall before it then enters the property. We're just doing it below ground level so that none of that unsightly cable is on show. You can see here it's not quite as big of a job as the outdoor lighting installation we looked at before. Nevertheless, digging the trench out to at least 600mm, just over ½ metre, that is 1 day's work for 3 guys. That's still a bit of investment in the labour to run a cable what is maybe 25-30 metres. There's the depth of the trench. We're at about 650mm there, maybe a little bit more, where the cable pops out of the house. You can see it's a bit of a mixture of patio, lawn, turf, garden, and then where Ellis is sat down there you can see that's going to be a bit more of a flower bed. So different materials, we've got some soil, some turf, a lot of buried gravel and such like. So yeah, it's taken us all day to get this dug out to the required depth. You see at this point we're only at about 500, so we need to go down a little bit further, especially we need to account for the fact that the customer may decide to put an extension on the back of the property. So we just need to make sure that any cable that we put in is going to be at the required depth and suitably protected. Paul and Ellis here installing the cable for this outdoor summer house. Now, this is a decent sized cable. In the end, they used a 16mm squared cable. Now, that might seem excessive. However, like I said, the customer was potentially intending putting a hot tub in. Hot tub might be rated at between 30 and 40 amps. They're looking at potentially a bit of patio heating. Again, if you've got maybe 2 or 3 13 amp patio heaters, it soon all adds up. You've got the summer house itself as well, so you might be looking at 70 amps. And a 16mm squared armoured cable would be more than capable of carrying that type of current. Anything lower than that, and although it might suffice for the installation that the customer is planning imminently, it doesn't give you any room to expand and add extra pieces of current using equipment at a later date. So this particular cable, off the top of my head, I think it was about 30 meters. It's 16mm squared, 3-core cable. Might be about between 250 and 300 pounds for the cable. So as with the labour, the cable itself is, comes at a cost, but it's better to spend an extra 50 or 100 pounds on putting a larger cable in at this stage when we've got the patio dug up, the garden dug up, rather than 2-3 years time when the customer wants to make more improvements to the property, realizing that cable can't carry the current required for these extra additions. So spending that extra little bit on cable now just future-proofs the installation if the customer wants to like I say, install extra bits at a later date. Now, this is an armoured cable, so as well as the conductors in the cable, just underneath the black sheath that you can see there, outer sheath, there is steel wire armour. So you can use steel wire armour cable directly buried in the ground with no need for an extra duct to run the cable in, because it's got that armoured protection. So you can see here Paul and Alice have fished the cable underneath the house into the garage where the consumer unit's located. We've got the cable in situ. The trench is at least 600 everywhere apart from this section just here, because we've got this manhole just to the left of where Paul's taking the footage, and that manhole had concrete all around it. There was pipe work underneath as well, so we've only been able to get to a depth of about 300 there. We'll show you how we've got around that in a moment. Everywhere else we're down to 600mm, and you can see we're just popping up in the corner of this patio area where the customer intends their summer house to be. So the next stage, you can see that the guys have just laid the cable on and covered the cable over with a little bit of sand. Now, this is to allow for a slight expansion and contraction in the ground with heating and cooling, rather than putting the concrete directly onto the cable. And I suppose it's also just provides that extra little bit of protection from sharp pieces of rock, etc., from piercing that outer sheath on the cable. You can see, obviously there's a fair bit of sand gone in there just to use as a bed for the cable, after which the guys are going to mix up a bit of concrete. Now, this is for the area where they've not been able to excavate deeper than about 300. So just in the foreground, just to the right of where the guys are shoveling the concrete in, is the manhole, which itself has been surrounded by concrete. So just to protect the cable, you can see they've covered it with a good layer of concrete. Now, if it had been down to the desired depth of 600mm, after the layer of sand, we could have laid our barrier tape, which we'll show you in a moment, directly on top of that. But in this instance, because we've not been able to get it down to the desired depth, it's gone concrete first, and then we're going to put our barrier tape down. You see there that Paul's sealed up the core hole with some building foam. As I said, although it's not a requirement, if we're buried to 600, we don't need to put the concrete on, but whilst the guys had the mixer out, you know, it's belt and braces, it's just protecting that cable further. Finally, we've got our barrier tape. This itself is, you know, it's quite a wide, thick, impact, if not proof, then certainly resistant tape, which we roll out, pin it in place before that the hole is then backfilled with the stuff that came out of it. So obviously you dig down far enough, you get to the tape first, you know to not dig any further, but if you would choose to, you know, not heed the advice on the barrier tape, you're going to hit concrete. So it's just, yeah, belt and braces, making sure that there's absolutely no risk of any damage, you know, happening to that cable, or indeed any sort of shock risk. Bit of a close-up there of the barrier tape. You see it's like a hard rubber compound. And finally, it's taken about 2.5 days to excavate the hole to the required depth, install the cable, sand, cement, barrier tape, backfill it with the materials that came out, and that will be ready for the consume unit, and then on to supply any current using equipment they're going to have in their summer house. So just to summarise, to do the job properly, you know, there's quite a bit of work involved excavating the route out to the required depth. The cable itself, depending on what current using equipment you're going to be having outside, depending on the length of run, we need to account for current usage, things like volt drop. So it might need to be a fairly chunky cable, especially if you're looking to have something heavy like a hot tub in your back garden. We then potentially need building materials. You know, if we can't get down to 600, we need to encase the cable in concrete, or at the very least we need to lay it on a bed of sand first before we backfill it. And then we need the barrier tape as well, the warning tape. Thanks for watching. If you would like to discuss an outdoor installation for your property, please don't hesitate to drop us a line. Contact details are in the description below.